Hey everyone. I wanted to come on here and kind of take a few minutes just to kind of share my heart with you. Hopefully, you'll take a few minutes just to listen, and please listen with your heart. Um, I got to be honest. Over the past couple of days, after the whole decisions were made last week with our Supreme Court and whatnot, my heart has been very, very heavy, and just really broken. Um, and this video is kind of a response out of that, and wanted just to kind of come to you, be transparent, and be honest with you. My my heart is not necessarily broken and burdened because of the decisions that were made. I mean, after all, we know that we are told that the Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and they will follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been cut off. So I don't really expect the world to be any different. I mean, after all, I think it's fair to say I don't think Christ expects the world to be any different. I mean, after all, isn't that the reason he came? Isn't that the reason he died? Because the world was condemned already? Because of our sin? He came to save us, to redeem us from that sin. I don't think, again, that Christ expects the world to act any differently than the world. But I also think and believe that Christ does expect the church, us, to act differently than how we've acted over the past few days. My heart is not broken because of the decisions that were made up in Washington, D.C. My heart is broken and heavy because of our response. Over the past few days, I've seen such horrendous things across my Facebook feed. I mean, forget the foul language, forget the name calling, just the complaining and the arguing and the bickering between my brothers and sisters. Is that really what Christ has called us to do? Is that how we're supposed to act and respond? Especially, and I think about the verses that Paul wrote to the Philippians. He says, "Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe." And honestly, I don't think we've shined very brightly over the past few days. And as I woke up and looked at my Facebook feed this morning, I still don't think we're shining all that brightly. What is our response? What should be our response? I know it's not this. I thought about a story of, or an instance when I was up in Morristown, Tennessee. I was eating dinner at the O'Charlie's up there, and I have a tendency to pray for my waiters and my waitresses. And one evening I was praying for my waiter, and throughout the night he came over. It was pretty late at night. There was not really a lot of people there, and he came over and sat down at my table and said, "Hey, you're the guy that always prays for us, right?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he says, "I want to share something with you." I said, "Okay, go for it." He says, "Man, I struggled for years with homosexuality, and knowing that it was wrong, and having these homosexual feelings that I just couldn't shake. And so, according to Scripture, I did what I thought I was supposed to do, which was go to my church elders, go to the deacons, and I had a meeting with them and said, guys, I need help. because I am struggling and being tempted with this sin, and I don't want to be tempted by it. Can you help me? Can you pray for me? Can you lift me up? The next Sunday, the gentleman goes to church, and a little old woman came up to him, met him out in the foyer of the church, and says, "Hey, aren't you that guy that's struggling with homosexuality?" And the waiter I was talking to told me he was kind of embarrassed because he didn't really want everybody knowing it. But he confessed and said, "Yeah, I am." And the woman looks at him and says, "Then what are you doing here?" The homosexual, that waiter, turns around, leaves the church, and never comes back. Hasn't been back to church since that night. And I don't know where he's at today. My question is to the little old woman, what are you doing there? Because Christ didn't come for the perfect. He didn't come for the people who are clean and who are well. He came for the sick. He came for those who are seeking help. He came for the lost. And if you think you have it down so well, then please go join the Pharisees, because that's not what the church is designed for. We're supposed to be opening our arms to people who are struggling, who are needing help, who are saying, "Hey, I'm hurting. I need someone to pray for me. I need someone to lift me up." Now, no, I'm not condoning homosexuality, and I'm not saying we should accept homosexuals as members of the church. No, we can't allow people to live in sin. The Bible is very clear on that. But we shouldn't also turn our backs to them and say, "Man, what are you doing here? Go clean yourself up before you come back." Please don't dirty up our choir robes. We're so clean. But yet, once again, we do the same thing through social media. We point the finger and say, "Man, dirty, rotten them." But let me throw something out at you. I look across my Facebook feed and I see all these disgusting posts of nudity and obscenities. And if many of you who would consider yourselves Christians will look at your Facebook profile page and see all your likes, all the videos you watch, what does that say about your walk? I mean, how many of my Christian brothers and sisters can't wait for, I don't know, the next episode of Game of Thrones to come out? Or Orange is the New Black, where there's blatant nudity and rape, profanity. And how many of my Christian brothers and sisters couldn't wait for 50 Shades of Grey to come out? I saw it all over my Facebook feed by people who claim to be Christians and yet are entertained by the sin. Christ told us, Matthew 5:4, that we shouldn't be entertained by this, that our response should be mourning. Our response should be saying, "God, I'm so stricken by this sin. Not only the sin in the world, but the sin in my own life. That I want to turn from it. God, clean me from it. Break my heart." But yet, we are entertained by it. And the message that the church preaches today is that, hey, I'm okay with being entertained by sin as long as you don't force it on me. I'm okay with sin as long as I have the option to choose it, but don't you dare force your sin upon me. And in reality, what we're doing is we're holding homosexuals and everyone out there to such a high standard that we ourselves aren't even willing to live up to. We ourselves aren't even willing to live up to what we're telling them that they're required to live up to before they can become part of our church. When most of us should be outside the church as well, if that's the standard. Hypocrites. We are such hypocrites. We have such huge planks in our eyes that we're not even willing to love them. And we can post all these memes on our Facebook profile saying, we're supposed to love the sinner but hate the sin. When we don't even do that. The church's response, I've seen all these pastors and their messages on Facebook saying, this is what I'm not going to do. This is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to marry homosexuals in our church. And that's okay. I'm down with that. But please, tell me what you're going to do. I hear all these denominations and these churches say, well, hey, let's just boycott things. Let's boycott Disney. They support homosexual families, so let's just turn our backs on them. When I never, ever see in Scripture that Christ has called us to boycott anyone. He's called us to lay down our lives. Think about it. Think about it for a second. You get to stand in a line for an hour to an hour and a half with a captive audience. And share the gospel. Heaven forbid. And besides that, you get to ride Dumbo and the teacups, see Elsa and Anna at the same time. It doesn't get much better than that, right? And if the person that you're talking to in line doesn't want to hear the gospel and they get out, well, guess what? You get to move up one space closer in line to the ride and talk to someone else. But we don't want to. We don't want to spend our money to share the gospel with a captive audience. When I was single and I didn't have kids, I look forward to those opportunities. Because, hey, if Satan was going to go through all the trouble to get a whole bunch of people together who was following him, then, hey, that's where I want to be. I don't have to search very hard to find people who are lost. I don't have to look so hard and make it so difficult. I knew where they were going to be. That's where I wanted to be as well. But yet our response is, hey, clean yourselves up, then come in. Let me complain about everything that's going on and not follow what Christ has called me as a Christian, as a believer to do. And that's to humble myself and pray. Pastors, again, I've heard all these messages from you guys saying we're not going to condone homosexuality, and we're not going to, despite what the U.S. government says, we're not going to marry homosexuals in our church. And that's great. But again, I ask you, what are you going to do? What are you going to lead your church in doing? Because if you really have a problem, and this goes to the church as well, if you really have a problem, then turn off Facebook and stop complaining and get on your knees and pray. Pray and fast. Pastors, lead your church into prayer and fasting. Stop complaining. Because we already have the promise from Christ, not if we get on Facebook and complain, but if we would humble ourselves. The people who are called by His name would humble themselves, seek Him, and pray, then He would come and heal our land. Our response as Christians is to pray and to fast, not to get on Facebook and complain. I was at Wendy's this past weekend, and there's 3 guys sitting behind me, and they were talking about rights and human rights and the Confederate flag and all this other stuff. And so I got up and went over to them and said, "Hey, do you mind if I join your discussion?" And they said, "Sure." And so they were talking about, again, the rights, the Confederate flag, and what the Confederate flag really meant. You know, guys, I was born in South Alabama. I love my Southern heritage. I really do. But I had to tell those guys at the table, I, as a Christian, have to view it from a perspective that if that flag is a hindrance to me sharing the gospel with someone, flag, what flag? Get rid of it. We Christians are too selfish and too self-indulged in our rights. We care more about our past than someone else's future, eternal future. We care more about our heritage than someone else's potential inheritance. We care more about our rights than someone else's salvation. Newsflash for you Christians. Rights? You don't have any. You forsook all your rights the moment you gave your life to Jesus Christ. And our response should be that of Paul's and says, "Hey, I'll give up anything. I'll give up my life itself if that means someone will come to know Jesus Christ." And yet, again, we're arguing over a stupid flag that it may not be a big deal to us, but if it's hurtful to someone else, then why are we engaging in it? You don't have any rights. What you have is an opportunity to love people and share the gospel. And I'll forsake all my rights and give them up if I can lead one person to Christ. Again, Paul writes to the Philippians, he says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should not only look to your own interest, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ." Guys, I'm tired of seeing the church being so selfish. I'm tired of hearing about your stupid rights. Bump that junk. What about Christ's rights when he died on a cross for you? Are you willing to go to the same extent to lead someone to Jesus Christ? Again, my challenge to you is, it is time, pastors included, that we clean up our own act. It is time that we humble ourselves, turn away from our sin, pray, and fast for God to heal us first, and then to heal the people around us. Are you willing to do that? And I'm not saying, I saw something on Facebook this morning of an invitation to pray when I woke up, and that's great and all. But this is not a one-time thing. And I see churches here in Georgia saying, hey, we're going to schedule a revival this week or that week. Revival doesn't happen in 1 week. Revival happens when we as Christians, as the church, are faithfully submitting our hearts and our lives to Jesus Christ. Seeking Him, seeking His heart. Revival starts in our own hearts. And then, if God should allow it, would spread into the hearts and lives of people around us. How bad do you want it? How bad do you want it? But I do ask my brothers and sisters, stop complaining. Stop whining. Stop bickering. And if you're going to call yourself a Christian, start acting like one. I love you. God bless.